So Roland, we're standing in front of what I believe is your really newest sort of forms and work that you've been doing, exploring, which are these. These happen to be smaller. You have a much larger version in your studio, but it's these really interesting. They're like versions of these, but assembled in a wall piece. It's 4 separate elements, but it's exploring the same idea of these literal voids that traverse between this vertical and this horizontal piece,
right,
and interact now between the 2 planes.
And the void creates the connection between them and then controls the relationship between the 4 elements to each other.
Right, and what's
and
really
provides
nice,
the identity for them, because they are totally, sculpturally, they're totally different. Geometrically, they are totally different from each other, but still make it into one unit.
right, because they read as a square.
Right.
And what it is it's the 2 verticals, and then the 2 horizontals are sitting on top. So there's a distinct dimensionality, which is also what's creating these wonderful cast shadows, and
Wow, yeah.
and especially with the directed light, we're really getting a lot of play, off of this, which of course just makes them even seem larger. But also this wonderful reflection off of the top of these elements here. So, and that's because if people are seeing this halo, that's where that's coming from. It's
right,
from the piece of, and this, because this is actually a shiny surface. This is not super matte.
No, it's not super matte.
And it's not matte like these.
You see, when it gets dirty in the graphic versions, because I touched them and over-painted them and used pencil and different media, when they get dirty, you have less of that. But
right,
you still have the hand in it, the narrative of doing exploration.
Right, yeah. No, I think they're really quite spectacular. I think they're really interesting. And the big one is like, is it 40 by 40 or? 42
by 42.
Yeah, which is pretty substantial. What's the weight on that? Is that very heavy? Is it about like having 4 of these, or?
No, heavier than that.
Heavier
because
than that.
6 by 6.
Okay.
So they are, I would say that each piece would weigh about 80 pounds. Yeah.
But that's what's sort of counterintuitive here, is that the fact that the diagonals are actually the connections, but they're the visual connection, not the literal connection.
Right.
So again, it's sort of this playing between 2 opposites, and this void creates this tie. And so I think that's what kind of, it gets back to what we were talking about earlier, how these voids actually create some sort of this interesting connection between things that are seemingly disparate or opposite to each other.
Right.
And that's what it's sort of.
That's what a void is. It's just, it leaves you room to ruminate.
Right. And the other thing too is we hadn't really talked about, and we haven't really presented any of it here, but these and the larger versions actually sort of do that for us. Because what happens now is there's also a bigger void that is literally this pass-through to the space. And so that's another aspect of voids that a lot of artists who do shaped canvases and things like that sort of play with, because when the work is done, either if there's interior openings or exterior shapes, how it's positioned in the room and the adjacency to another object or to a corner, it reads very differently.
And what you see through the piece when you have an opening. And so it becomes an opportunity, but at the same time, it becomes a challenge, because if you don't know how it's going to get hung, you're not really sure how it's going to translate. So if you don't know when it leaves the studio or the gallery, how it's going to work. There, I'm totally fatalistic.
You what?
I'm totally fatalistic about that, because the space will provide its own identity or its aspect of identity to the piece.
Right.
So if a piece like this wanders into another space, it will take on different character and provide.
Well, and it's like your studio's right next door, and when we brought him over, because your lighting, your wall texture, and everything's totally different than here, you were sort of. You just, well, not surprised, you expected it, but you were really pleased with how these actually looked here versus at the studio.
Without us having to change the lighting.
Yeah. It was just sort of amazing.
Exactly.
But it's to your point, they just, even just
from 213 to 211
yes.
on the same street.
Exactly.
You know, it completely transformed him.
Look, and if you look at it as a painter, this color, you know, if you turn off the light and just have natural light, these colors will change completely.
Yeah, they'll get less dark. They'll be less dark and a little bit more even, flattened out. But yeah, these are spectacular. So I really wanted to point these out. And then, so yeah, if we move to the two pedestal pieces in the back, can you? Okay, so let's go back here because these are two others that I know you've done similar things in the past, but this is the first time I've actually have seen you present them as a pair that on a column, and
right.
and you've conceived of these to be together and stay together. So these are sold like this because this is how they were conceived. But what's
right.
interesting is these we were pointing to earlier when we were talking. These are dimensional voids, and this is the graphic void.
Iteration.
And these are very powerful and strong. And so are these just pairs that you've taken out of things like these objects here or from other ones? Or have you created these sort of separately and distinctly for this?
The tribe, and the families in the tribe evolved out of these pieces.
These came first.
Yes.
Okay.
And you know, these are obviously two half sections in this volume.
Right.
And these explorations go back to late 60s when I started these explorations. And they were of different nature at that time. Material was different, aesthetic was somewhat different. But the idea was there. Mm-hmm. So it's something that has continued. Continue. Cut this out.
And these are wood as well. Painted,
these are probably a very stable wood. It, shouldn't be cracking, and it's artificially aged and so on. It could be out of different material.
Yeah, and they're painted very pristinely, so they're really very smooth and clean. Mm-hmm. But I like these. There's another pair that have more cuts in them at more diverse angles around the corner from where we were. And but I've seen them in your studio, but I never realized they were intended to be together. I mean, I've seen them standing around.
Well, I explored with them to see if they would stand alone.
Right.
And they can stand alone.
Yeah, I think they're powerful. I like them a lot, and I think they're really. It's a great way to present, sort of your these two languages or these two vocabularies.
And I'm not shy of sharing of where the stuff comes from. It's no mystique.
Well, there's a literalism about your work too. So yeah, it's like there's no mystery. There's no illusion in that respect. But it's the thinking, I think, that's really what's so interesting about the work, about your work, is that how you've thought through it, and especially once you start engaging and talking to you, you see the work very differently, and you realize the complexity of it, but at the same time, you appreciate the simplicity of it because of what it's a complicated outcome, but you have to get through it through a very simple, elegant approach. And so, and that's what I think is really fantastic about the work. And these, and these little wall pieces we were just talking about, the ones with the two parallel, vertical and horizontal columns. Those when you just first look at them, are much more complex. And you really have to kind of take it in and kind of examine it a bit, because there's, the depth and the shadows and all this, there's a lot more interplay going on, in those. And so that's sort of an interesting nuance, another new nuance, that the lighting in the shadows being on the wall as opposed to on the floor creates a whole different level of complexity.
Exactly. But you pointed that out with the planar piece, those two large elements, that how rich a visual environment can be created with this very, very simple method. And how much complexity can be conveyed with minimal output, but enriching output for the viewer,
right,
including myself.
right.
It's not that all of it is premeditated. There's a lot of, even if the pieces are hung in a different space, they just tell a different story.
Yeah, yeah, because you can't control the height of the ceilings or the windows or how wide a room is or what else is in there.
And the light.
Yeah, well, light has a huge effect on all of this work.
Yeah.
So, any parting thoughts?
Yeah, let me point out the difference. This graphic iteration here, like in this small frame piece,
Yes.
is basically a illustration, a graphic illustration of what I achieved with the sculpture, with the dimensional piece.
Right.
When you explore things graphically,
Hang on, let's just, I think Yao can follow us. Okay.
yeah, then the vocabulary becomes different. The surface vocabulary of this stroke here becomes different from this one, because the mode of incising a volume changes that vocabulary. You see this diagonal ending is void here. So it's also the graphic interpretation then becomes part of the vocabulary. So it's analogous to typography. It's the same story told with different typography.
Yes. Yes, I see that.
Sorry for jumping that on you, but
No. But it still works. I mean, you still...
that's so amazing that we get it. Visually, we get it instantly.
But some of that, I think, is gestalt. We know that when we know something's, a cube, or we know it's this vertical column, and we know there's two sides. And so even though we try and have a trick of the eye using really matte paint and what have you, you still kind of figure it out. Your mind figures it out. But not always. And so what's different here is we can see all of this, but if you come down to this level and you don't see the top, you know what I mean?
Oh,
so
yes,
here,
yes.
when we see the top, we're like, oh, well, that's a column. I got it, sort of thing. But when you don't see all of that, and things are plain or very flat and matte, then it does become, that's when you know it worked, when you start seeing, especially when I see clients, come in and people, and they'll see, a piece of work and they'll look at it, and all of a sudden they go like this. And then they just have to like check and make sure, is that three-dimensional?
Exactly.
So you can tell it worked, because even though they thought they knew, they still had to double check.
This is why that's where the diversity of individuals' vocabulary to viewing things. It makes it so interesting.
Yeah. And it is fun to watch people, and that's why a lot of times I don't tell them anything, and I just kind of let them look, because people know that we have represented people like Julian Stanczak and Richard Anaskevich and people like that whose work has a very illusory aspect to it in terms of, they're planes in space, but they use color and pattern and this sort of and things that trigger the eye to do it. And that's why I'm always enjoy when I see work like yours, where it's so, I don't mean simple like in a dumbed down way. I mean it's so elegant, and it still works, it still functions, and it's so interesting, and you really show how the eye and the mind work so closely. I'm thinking of people like Leo Vallador, another artist we represent, who's also part of Park Place Gallery, by the way. And he loved color, and he loved shaped canvases. And so but he liked things really clean and simple. Not a lot of color. No, he wasn't doing any modeling. The colors were flat. It was blocks of color. But he had this incredible mind to think about this interaction between colors and how the colors push and pull
and create dimensionality with their adjacency. And he also knew how to, he loved vector geometry. He's another one who was, was fascinated with Buckminster Fuller. And so he loved to then do shaped canvases because he would use those extreme vector planes, very few colors, 2, 3, was his favorite, 4 tops.
Yeah.
But it was that combination of the push-pull, it was that combination of the extreme vector geometry, but then he also, what he did was to create this internal tension and torque was, then he would cut the canvases, they would be shaped.
Right.
And that distortion, it just sort of throws you, and it looks like, something that was just sort of taken off the wall and just sort of torqued, and so people do, they get up and they kind of really look at that and they go like, what is that, and it's fascinating to see that, but again, his work reminds me a lot of yours, and I think you saw that one exhibition we had of his.
Yes, I did, yeah.
Well, yeah, it was this past fall, wasn't it? Yeah, it was right when it was right followed your show. That's right.
Yeah, before
he was
the show before mine. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so anyhow, I love that, and that's why I find your work so similar to his, but yet you don't use color, but this wonderful interplay,
right.
between how you play with materials and shapes and the environment around the work has this really powerful effect. And it does. People really have to kind of step back and kind of ponder it when they're looking at it, which is, I think, makes it really successful.
Right.
It also keeps the work very evergreen, I think, because everyone engages with it differently. And when people have to walk around and kind of look at it, it makes it very kinetic, and it makes them have to interact. Because you don't sometimes get it just looking at it like this. People they'll walk around, and that's why I'm glad you agreed to go ahead and break up the tribe into families. Not all the families, but
it was just
some.
too massive for this space.
Yeah, but what's great about it now, and the way you laid it out, at first when you described it to me as peninsulas, I was sort of like, what? And then I realized you wanted people to be able to kind of come in and walk around, but also the way we put these other pieces on the wall, it created these sort of environments and these geometric dialogues between what's on the floor and what's on the wall, and then I realized, this is sort of doing the heavy lifting for us, because now with the proximity, people are picking up on the shapes and the forms, and now the geometry actually becomes line in a lot of these. These geometries and these slices actually become lines, and they become vectors that connect to the next thing.
Exactly.
And so you start getting these, you can think of these points coming in space. So not to get all trippy and everything on you. And no, I was not having peyote before I came over today. But,
oh, yes,
no, but it's really kind of interesting. So that was something that turned out to be serendipitous with the way we ended up doing this. That really wasn't our thought. But when I stood back and looked at it last night.
So if you, like you, look at an awful lot of work, you have a very, very quick study on this stuff. It's the rummage in your think box that then puts these things together without you realizing it.
Yeah. You're right, and it gets back to the viewer specificity. Viewers will all have a different take on things for that exactly that reason.
Right.
Whether because they came up through some people through science and some people through literature and some people analytical, some not. And that's why people engage very differently with the work, which is interesting, and that's what I kind of like about it. Well, all in all, I think it's a little denser than I think you and I have both intended. But you know what? I think it actually works great because it's now all this dialogue between different things on the wall and on the floor and between the different materials. I think I'm certainly getting a different appreciation than I did from the first show. And part of it too could be the light, because we got all those windows on that side and we're getting the light in, and we're getting these really great reflections and shadows, which is sometimes annoying, but it actually is working great with this work.
Right.
So all in all, I think very successful. So
yeah, I agree. It feels good to me. It feels really good to me.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us. And on these videos, what I'd like to remind people is please follow the gallery, and when you view these videos on YouTube and the other outlets, it really helps funnel people back to Roland and to his work and to the gallery to kind of help out with letting people see some of the other works. Because we have other videos with Roland that we've done over the last year and a half or so that really cover a lot of different aspects of his work. So please subscribe and please like the videos. We would really appreciate it a lot.